So I'll just start my recording. Pop our chat window over here. Okay, so it's week 5. So here's what we are going to do today. We're going to take a look at the scaffolded code that we generated at the end of class last week. We'll kind of poke our way through it and examine some of what's in there. And then we want to start to customize the beer store that our scaffolding generated. So we're going to make some changes to both our controllers, our views, and our models, all three of them really, so that the application is more fully functional and that we're improving the usability of it, better layout, better format, things like that. We're going to make changes in our models in terms of validating our data. We're also going to add the ability to upload a file. So when we're adding a product to the store, we want to be able to attach an image of that product. So we can maybe go to the actual beer store website and grab some photos that we can use. We're going to make our grids sortable. And also importantly, we want to deploy the application to Azure via GitHub. I think I'm actually going to start with that item. So how do we take an application that's running locally and how do we use Azure's continuous deployment model through GitHub? So what I'm going to do is make a couple changes to my application, and then I'm going to push it up to GitHub, and then I want to connect my GitHub repository to an Azure website. So let's see how these things work. I'll try to keep today's class to 2 hours. I think based on the scope of what we're doing, I should be able to do this. So the first thing we'll need in order to publish our application, now you don't have to do this with your beer store, but I'm going to walk through the process and I am recording it so you know how to post your assignment online. So for your assignment, the first thing you'll need is to create an SQL Server database in the Azure portal. So I walked through this process last week. It's in last week's recording. If you need help with it, you can let me know. Okay, so I have created a beer store database, and I set my server firewall so I allowed all users into the database. And I'm going to open up I've opened up my project. So last week in class in my beer store application, I was using a local database, but now I'm going to connect it to a database on Azure, because obviously for your assignment, you won't be able to use a local database. Your database should be an Azure database. So in my app settings.json, I have the credentials for my Azure database, my data source or my server is my host on Azure, the server I created, the database name, and then I have my username and password in my app settings.json file. So in your assignment, you'll need your Azure database credentials in your app settings.json. So then I'm going to go to my Team Explorer and I'm going to upload my latest version because I've changed the app settings.json. I've put in my Azure credentials. I'm going to upload this to GitHub first. So lesson 5. So these are my Azure DB credentials. So I'm going to commit these changes and push them to GitHub. Which shouldn't take long. And now I'm going to go back to the Azure portal and I'm going to create a new web application and I'm going to connect my web application to my GitHub repository. So I'm going to create a new resource. I'm going to choose web app. I'll use an existing resource group. And now it wants a name that'll be a subdomain of azurewebsites.net. So I'll call it beer store. Okay. Rich's Beer Store. I'm going to publish from code. We're not using Docker. It wants to know what runtime we're using. I'm going to use .NET Core 3.1. And I want it deployed on Windows. I'll pick Canada Central. Doesn't really matter. And it's defaulting to the free plan. So then I'm going to click Review and Create. And this is going to set up that subdomain, that richesbeerstore.azurewebsites.net, and I'll just click Create. So we'll give the portal a minute. It's going to deploy a new web application. And once this is done, I'm going to open up the resource, and I want to connect it to my GitHub repository. So once it's done, I can just click this Go to Resource button. It also pops up here. So here's our web application. If I click the URL right now to my site, it's just going to give us kind of a template page. This is our default. So it's an empty site, just gives us an HTML kind of starting page. So in the Azure portal, I'm going to go to the Deployment Center. And I've got several options as to where I want to deploy from. So I'm going to choose, under source control, I'm going to pick GitHub, and notice it says not authorized. So what I need to do is pick GitHub, and then I'm going to click the authorize button. Now, I've already logged in through GitHub. So you may get a little GitHub pop-up window asking you to put in your GitHub username and password. I've already done this, so it already now recognizes my GitHub login. Then I'll click Continue. Here, I think I'm just going to pick the first option, the app service build. I haven't actually tried the GitHub Actions, but I'm just going to pick the app service build and click Continue. So now it's going to show me all of my repositories on GitHub. So I'm going to pick my beer store. So here's my beer store application. It's going to default to the master branch because I haven't created any other branches. And I'll click Continue and Finish. So Azure is now reaching into my repository, and it's copying the source code from GitHub. It's pulling a copy into the Azure web server. So it shows as pending for now, and now it's trying to deploy the site with my latest commit message. So we'll let this run. And hopefully it's going to deploy successfully. If not, there's a log here for every deployment attempt. The other nice thing about this is I can roll back. So if I make a new commit to GitHub, and then I check it out on the web server and I've broken the website, I can just click on an earlier version and redeploy an earlier version. So I don't need to use FileZilla or FTP at all to publish my site anymore. I'm going to refresh this, see if it's done yet. Not quite. Shouldn't take too long. So when I set this up to be connected, it should automatically sync my changes. So anytime I make a new commit to GitHub, Azure should automatically pull those new changes. Okay, so it says my deployment was successful. And now I can click on Browse. And now my beer store is deployed here. So if I go to my store, so things are, if I make changes, let's say I make a change in the, maybe I'll make a change to the home page. Maybe I want to change the content. So I'll go back to Visual Studio and open up my site homepage. So under home and index, say welcome to Rich's COMP2084 beer store. I'll get rid of that. So now I'm going to make a new commit, push new changes to GitHub. So I go back to my Team Explorer, changes. I updated the home page. So I'm going to commit and push to GitHub, which should run pretty fast. And then I'll come back to the Azure portal. And you'll notice it's already, every 60 seconds, Azure checks the Git repository for changes. So it sees there's a new commit. And it's automatically going to try to update. So now it's telling me, okay, this version is now active. The old version is deactivated. If I refresh my home page, the content in the middle should get updated. So this way, backing up to GitHub and deploying your changes to the web server, basically, it's one operation. We don't have to push the code to GitHub and use FTP to upload to the web server. So if this version broke something, I could just click on the first version and redeploy the earlier version. Okay, so you'll need to do this for your assignment. You'll need to make sure you're using your Azure database in your app settings.json. You'll create and push your new repository to GitHub. You'll make a new website in the Azure portal and then connect it to your repository through the deployment center. So now we've got a website that's deployed continuously. All changes are automatically updated on the web server as soon as we push them to GitHub. Does anybody have any questions about that process? You know what, Leo? Yes, I'm probably going to skip over it and leave it. I'll explain why. Normally, for your database connection strings in Azure, there's this configuration option. And we often put the database connection string in here instead. You can do that. So you would add your database connection string here because it is at runtime. So you can add it through here in the portal. Yeah, we probably should, and you're welcome to. I'm just trying to keep it a little bit simpler for now. So if you do add the app settings to git ignore, then you definitely need to add your connection string in the Azure configuration. Absolutely fine if you do that. And it's probably recommended. I'm just going to leave that out just kind of in the interest of time. But yes, you're right. It is ideal that you put your connection string here and your git ignore excludes app-settings.json. That will mean other values that are in app-settings.json, like when we do Google logins, we're going to have Google API keys. So if you ignore the app-settings.json, you have to add those through here as well. Good point. Okay. Are there other questions about deploying to Azure? Right. Thank you, Stella. Okay. Yeah. So I don't need my site to be running right now because it will use my credits. So if you go to the overview, so the main section, there's a stop button right here on the toolbar. So once once I mark your assignment, you can stop it. You're going to use it later for assignment 2, but once assignment 1 is marked, you don't have to keep it running. So you just, even for your main page, I'll go back in here. So if I just go to the beer store, it takes me to the overview, and I'll just stop the server. So I haven't deleted it. I've just temporarily taken the server offline because the Azure credits, the cloud hosting is based on a price per use. So the longer a resource is used and the more it's used, the more they charge you. So when you're working on your assignment, you can start the server. If you're done working for the day, even before you submit, you can stop the server and just start it as you're working, and then keep it running when you submit it. But once I've marked it, I'll send an email to everyone saying stop the servers so that it doesn't use all your credits. Good question. Thank you for reminding me about that. So to start it again, you just click start and it will run again. This only works for the website. It doesn't work. We don't have this option for the database server, unfortunately. Great question. Okay. So I'm going to start my local project running. We're going to maybe examine some of the code that got auto-generated last week, and then we want to make some changes to it. As I said, we want to change some of the models, some of the views, and some of the controllers. So I'm connected to my Azure database right now. I'm going to put my connection back to my local database just because it's going to run faster during class. So I'm just going to put everything back to local. Okay, so I'm just going to connect to my local database. We added some categories to our website last week using the scaffold. Oops. 4VC 8VP2. Okay, so these are the categories we put in last week. So we created these views. We created a controller and it gave us these views. And we started working with them and said, wow, they kind of work. They're neat. We didn't really look at them. So I'm going to open up my categories controller. So we can actually take a little bit of a closer look at what's happening here, because there's a few things we haven't seen before. So when we created the controller, we got a constructor, and this is either in our categories or our products controller. It generates a constructor, and our constructor takes as a parameter an instance of our application DB context. So every time you instantiate our controller, the controller is using our database connection class. That was this file right here that comes with our project, but we modified last week. So our controller takes this as a dependency. When you instantiate our controller by calling the constructor, it receives an object, a database connection object. It calls it underscore context, and this is used in all of the methods for doing create, read, update, and delete. I'm not going to dissect all the code, but just a few things we maybe haven't seen before that I want to point out. So this is the categories controller we created. This was the home controller that came with the project. So notice both of them have an index view. So here's our index view in our home controller. Here's the index view when we scaffolded our categories controller. What things do you see that are, what's different about them? So here's one index method. Here's the other index method. What differences do you notice between those two? Okay, so yeah, we see await in here. We don't see it here. That's right, Stella. Anything else different? Yep, you got it, Justine. So we've got async and await. There's two other small differences, two other things that the scaffolded method has that this one doesn't have. What else besides async and await? Yep. So this one returns a task of type iActionResult. This one returns an iActionResult directly. So what is, anybody have an idea? What does this async do? What does it mean? Both of these methods still work. They both still return a view. What does async do? Yep, you're right, Leo. It is it is an asynchronous function. So what does that mean in simple terms? Like to a non-technical person, how could we say what asynchronous code does? Okay. Yes, that's true. It's related to how we use threads. Okay. Right. So most code, so this code in our home controller, this is synchronous code or block code that blocks, meaning that this code executes one line at a time. And when one line is executing, the thread waits until that line completes before it can move on to the next command, next line of code. By default in ASP.NET, in newer versions, all the controllers, when we scaffold, all the methods are asynchronous. meaning that they can start one process and continue on and do another process and wait for the first process without waiting for the first process to finish. So we'll see that all the methods are declared as async. And instead of returning an iAction result directly, asynchronous methods return a task. Basically, this means we'll return an iAction result, but maybe not right away. We may have to wait and do something else before this action result is returned. So we see the method is async, and that means we're going to start this code and we can carry on doing other things and then come back here when this is finished. You'll work with this more also. You're probably working with this as well in your Node class that I think you have with Jake, if I'm not mistaken, Jake or Tom. So by default, our methods are asynchronous. So we're going to see this async and task in all the method headers. Oh, your Node class, okay, they've moved it, so it'll be next semester. Last year it was in semester 3. So all the controller methods are asynchronous. So we're going to see this await whenever we're making calls to the database. They're made asynchronously. And you can see the methods have this async suffix on them. So this is something new. Doesn't really affect what we do. We don't really need the asynchronous code for our purposes, but it will work. So in our index method, basically what's happening here is we're using the database connection. We're using our categories list that we've declared here in our database connection. And we're fetching a list of all the categories asynchronously. And then we are loading our index view and returning the data. So that is what renders this page. Now, when we go to add, let's have a look maybe at the code for a minute. When we go to add, what's happening here? So there's 2 versions of the create method. There's a get version and a post version. The get version is called when we click this link and we want to display the form. This loads categories create, and it uses the method get. So what happens? Well, it just loads our create form in the browser. Doesn't do anything else. We've also got a post version. So this is what happens when the user submits the form. So notice on our post version, it has this decorator, HTTP post. We could have HTTP get up here, but we don't need it because that's the default. It uses a hidden token to prevent users from other websites posting to our form. So that's an anti-spam mechanism, really. And then we're connecting the ID and name properties on the form, which we see here. So here's our category create, right? We have an ASP for name. We don't even really need the ID. So then how does this add it to the database? It binds these 2 properties to a new category object called category. We then use our database object to add the new category. And then to actually commit that to the database, we call this save changes async. So we're creating a new object, and then we save it to the database. So when line 62 runs, that actually creates a new record in SQL Server. And lastly, we call the index method. So it loads the index view where we can see our new category. So our edit method would be similar. To do an update, we're going to call update on our database object. And again, save changes asynchronously. Our delete page that works. We find the category, we remove it, from our database context. And again, we call save changes to commit the changes to the database. So it's fine that the scaffolding is building this code, but it's kind of a good idea for us to understand what we're doing, because later on we're going to need to write some of our own methods that interact with the database. The scaffolding won't do everything. So when you go to build the cart, we're going to need to write some of this code ourselves. For now and for assignment 1, it's fine that we're just using all the auto-generated code. That's okay. Okay, let's start making a few customizations. So we added a bunch of we added one product to the database. We also want to, when we're adding a new product, excuse me, we want to be able to not only fill out the product data, but we want this photo to be a file upload. We want to be able to browse to a new photo and add it. So we're going to have to make a couple changes to this. We're going to have to change the view, and we're going to have to change the code in the product controller to be able to process a file upload. So first, let's deal with the view. If we go to open up, if you want to open up your products and open up the create form, down on line 47, we have a regular input for the photo. So we're going to change this a little bit. I'm going to take out the ASP4, and I'm just going to change that to name equals photo and ID equals photo. I'm also going to change the type to be file, so we get a file upload control instead. On line 46, I'm just going to take out the ASP dash. So I've changed lines 46 and 47. And if we reload it, now I get so in my label, I think I also have to add the word photo here. So I'm adding this to line 46. So now I can browse and, oh, I've already got some beer logos. Great. So I'll put this code into the chat if that makes it easy. Here are the new lines 46 and 47. So now we need to write code in the post method for create that will check if a file got uploaded, and we'll save that file to the database. We'll save that file to the file system. We also want to give that file a unique name in case we have two files that get uploaded with the exact same name. We don't want one to overwrite the other one. So once you've got the code I put in the chat on lines 46 and 47 of your product create, open up your product controller. And I'm going to pick this create product method in this little drop down at the top right. Or you can just scroll down to line 60. So this is binding the different fields. I'm going to take out the photo. We're going to bind that separately. So I'm going to take out the volume. Sorry, I'm going to take out the comma. And we're going to add here a new parameter to the method, which is an iForm file that we call photo. Now Visual Studio says, I don't know what iForm file is. We need to add the missing reference to fix this. So we need to reference Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.HTTP. So again, I've taken out the photo parameter from the list of bound fields, and instead we've added a third parameter, which is of type iForm file. So before we save anything to the database, we need to check if a photo got uploaded, because it isn't required. Somebody might add a product and not put a photo in. So before we save to the database, we are going to process photo upload, if any. So we're going to check the length property of our photo object. If no photo got uploaded, then length is going to be 0. And this code will get ignored.
Rich.
Yep.
On line 63 where it says model state is invalid, what does that mean?
If model state.is valid, we'll come to that later. It means if any of the validation rules in the model, if all the validation rules are followed. So for example, if we say name is required, but the user doesn't enter a name, that model state.is valid will be false.
Okay, thanks.
So first we want to know, where did the file get uploaded to temporarily? We need to add a missing reference here to system.io. We want to make a unique file name so nothing gets overwritten. So I'm going to use a class called GUID, a globally unique ID. And we're going to put this on as a prefix to our file name. So if we upload logo.jpg, it'll become ABC123. It'll be a long, unique string at the beginning. So where do we want to upload this to? First, we're going to get our current directory, because the path will be different on our local computer and on the web server. So we want this path to be dynamic. And where we're going to put these are in www root, and I have to escape with double slashes here. So we're going to need to create this folder in a minute. So this will give us the directory right from the root drive. We've already got a www root folder in here. We're going to need to create an images folder, an IMG folder, and inside there I want to create a subfolder called product uploads. This is where I want all of the product logos to get saved. So in order for this to work, we need to go and create these folders. So in my Solution Explorer, I may as well do that now. Under www root, I'm going to add a new folder called IMG. And then inside of IMG, I'm going to make a new folder called product-uploads. So this is where we're going to save the uploaded product logos. So we're going to use a stream, a file stream object. We're going to save to our upload path in file mode create. And then we're going to copy, whoops. We're going to use our stream to copy our photo.
Rich, can you explain what await means again, please?
Await means the code runs asynchronously. So this code, if it takes a while to execute, the code underneath it can then execute. It doesn't have to wait until this is finished. And then we also need to set the unique photo name to save to the database. So our product.photo, which is a string, is going to be equal to our file name. That includes our unique identifier. I'll put the whole block in the chat. We'll try it out and see what happens. So I'm going to go and add a new product. And I'll try and upload my photo and we'll see what happens. You can pick any photo on your computer. So the original file name is steamwhistle.jpg. This should get a unique name. I'll click create. I think we missed one thing. So let me just go back. There's one thing I forgot to do in our form. To process the file uploads, I'm going to go back to my create view. On line 14, we need to add this. Encoding type equals multi-part form data. So here's your line 14. Without setting the encoding type, our form cannot process a file upload. Should have done this at the beginning. Common oversight. So that's line 14 of your product create view. So I'm going to go try again. Okay, so it's saved to the database. And now we can see the photo, it got prefixed with this long sort of random string. If I go and look in my product uploads, I now have it also saved my image. So if I go to my File Explorer and open up www.root and IMG product uploads, my image is copied. Okay, so our code does look like it's working properly. We set up the encoding type in the form. We changed our input to a type file. In the controller, we've added this form file parameter. And then we checked if we got a photo being uploaded. If so, we grabbed its temporary location, created a unique name, set the destination path as our image product upload, and we used a file stream object to copy the photo. And then we grabbed the new name that included our unique ID to save to the database. So all this happens before we add the product and save. So one of the other things we'll want to do on this page is we'll actually want to display the images if we have them. So we'll want to modify the index view. So if we have an image, it shows up, it's visible. Okay, it is 10 to 3. We're going to take a 10-minute break. Are there any questions before we take a break? Okay, I am not seeing any questions, so I'm going to stop my share and my record, go for a refill, and we will resume at 3 o'clock.